All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're taking a look at when a Christian apologist finds a contradiction. What happens? We're going to find out today. I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy, and we're taking a look at Pastor Mike Winger. We're looking at his series, Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. And while doing so, I stumbled across this. Obviously, this isn't really a behind-the-scenes look at a contradiction, but you can't really get the behind-the-scenes look when a person who reads a text finds a contradiction. But sometimes a pastor has preached and made a point, and then later finds a passage that tends to contradict that point. And that's what we're going to see here with Pastor Mike Winger, who is speaking from the Gospel of Luke about the road to Emmaus in this sermon.
Verse 16, and this is really interesting. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus draws near, he's resurrected, and their eyes can't see him. It doesn't say he was unrecognizable physically, it says their eyes couldn't. So the problem's with their eyes, as though God supernaturally kept them from understanding who they were looking at.
This is really interesting. It's about their eyes, and at the end we find the same thing.
Verse 31 is really interesting. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him. So just like their eyes were kept from recognizing him, now the opposite's happened. Their eyes are opened, not that they were physically closed, but there was something keeping them from seeing who Jesus was. So boom, now they see Jesus for who he is, and he vanished from their sight, and they said to...
I like the little sound effect. I like the way Mike Winger preaches. I'm sorry. I enjoy listening to the guy. But yes, you get it again at the end. Their eyes are open. So their eyes were closed, their eyes are open. It's not about the form. And then he goes on to make this theological, well, not really theological, but he goes on to make this point about it being their eyes and not the form of Jesus.
An added later idea. It's the original purpose. It's the original design. Jesus in the Old Testament. I also think it's really interesting too. There's kind of an allegory within the passage that I'll point out if I can. You might wonder, why were they really kept from recognizing him? First off, right, we noticed it was their eyes that couldn't see him. It wasn't that he was unrecognizable. It was they were unable to recognize. So it was on them, not him. So I don't think it had to do with some disfigurement or something of Jesus. That's not what the text seems to say. But there's a parallel. If you look at verse 16 and then verses 31 and 32, let me read those to you real quick and I'll look at this parallel. It says, but their eyes were open, verse 16, their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And then verse 31 and 32, I have that somewhere here in my notes. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us? When they started their journey to Emmaus, they knew the Old Testament, but didn't understand Jesus in the Old Testament. They meet Jesus, they're with him, but they don't know it. By the end of the journey, the scriptures are open and they can see Jesus in the Old Testament, and they can see Jesus right in front of them. I think it's a picture of how Jesus says, when you open up your eyes and you see me in the Bible, you see me. And I think that's a really neat picture.
So there's his allegory. It's when your eyes are open, then you see Jesus in the Old Testament, but without your eyes being open. And this is, consistent with the veil over their eyes, the whole 9 yards. And it's a logical conclusion, because if you think about it, in Luke and John, you have the nails, right? The nails in the hands and feet. So it would be really weird, since he still has the wounds from the crucifixion, that these guys didn't recognize him. It would almost have to be about their eyes, right? But when we get to Mark, we find something entirely different going on.
It says here, after that, he appeared in a different form to two of them while they were walking along their way to the country. And they went away and reported to the others, but they did not believe them either. So you see the same pattern. He appears. The people who see him tell the disciples. They don't believe it. Now, this account is reported in more detail in Luke. In Luke 24, verses 25 through 27, I'm actually going to read just little pieces of the...
Now, I want to give Pastor Winger credit here, because It would be very easy to do your Mark and Luke sermons separate and never the two shall meet. But he does point out that there's a problem. He kind of undersells it here.
But what we're going to find is that, and this is probably the first moment where it might feel like there's a divergence between Mark's longer ending and one of the other Gospels, Luke. So I'm being careful with my words here. I say it might feel like there's a divergence. I'm going to walk through what this is and how I would explain.
It might feel like there's a divergence, but folks, it's quite clearly a contradiction. It's not a big deal, but it's quite clearly a contradiction. But Pastor Winger has a resolution right here.
So there's obviously two solutions. One solution is you think the longer ending doesn't belong in Mark. So you just say, well, that's just Luke, some commentary from some early Christian. This isn't from Mark. Another solution is,
by the by, that is the correct solution. This is in the long ending. This is after verse 8 in the final chapter of Mark. So it's in the long ending. It's written by somebody else. Yeah, it's not a biblical contradiction because it's not actually in the Bible. That is the solution that I find. But this is a creative solution right here.
That perhaps, and this I think is valid, perhaps their eyes were kept from recognizing Jesus because he was in a different form. Okay, that's also possible.
Notice he laughs while he's saying it. Now, listen, there are three reasons he could be laughing here from where I sit. One reason is because it's a laughable explanation, which is where I fall on the scale. It could also be cognitive dissonance, or it could be that he's thinking back to his sermon where he preached a point based off of taking it the other way. And this sermon comes a couple of years later, so it's entirely possible, and I believe in being generous with people. I presume that Pastor Winger, he'd probably read this, but he'd probably never connected the two before. After making a point about it, it clicks, right? And then we got it. See, this is what I meant by behind the scenes look. This is, he knows that this sermon is out there. He kind of has to address this, and I give him credit for having done so. He goes on.
And it may be that their eyes were opened in that even though he's in a different form in some sense, they're given the ability to see who he is. That's also possible. After all, it's only an implication in Luke. It's not like a clear dogmatic thing. So it's just my guess.
It seems pretty clear in Luke, and it seems pretty clear that he found it to be pretty clear in Luke from the other one. But I have a bit of an allegory of my own that would explain this, okay? Think about this. Mark is the first gospel. Luke comes later. So it's about his form or their eyes. And the earlier back you go in Christianity, it would be about his form. Notice nobody ties Isaiah 53 to Jesus, right? When Peter says, you're the Messiah, and when Jesus pulls him aside, I'm going to have to suffer and die, he goes, what are you crazy? Like, nobody, literally nobody, even the Ethiopian eunuch after the time of Jesus, he says, he's reading Isaiah 53, and Philip says to him, do you understand what you're reading? He says, how could I understand it without a teacher? Like, nobody, so it's about the form of Jesus. But as Christians have time, just like when Philip explains it, Isaiah 53, right? Well, nobody's thought of this yet. So as they begin to tie these prophecies like Isaiah 53, like Psalm 22, which, Psalm 22 isn't, I don't believe, really a prophecy anyway, but as they begin to tie these things to Jesus, the picture becomes clear. So then it's about your eyes. If you ignore Isaiah 53, you got the veil over your eyes, right? But prior to that, it was about the form of Jesus. That's my take on this. Maybe yours is different. If so, leave me a comment down below. But don't forget to like the video, share it on social media, or subscribe to the channel. Don't just sit there. Do something.